Speaking of justice being done, ladies and gentlemen, it does seem that a severe injustice has been done with the reporting of an incident which turned 10 years old this year, right? The atrocities that took place at the Eagles of Death metal concert at the Bataclan Theatre in Paris 10 years ago, where I believe it was around 98 people lost their lives? 89 people, sorry. 89 people lost their lives, including Eagles of Death metal band merch manager Nick Alexander, after a bunch of terrorists broke in to the Bataclan Theatre and started shooting. They had suicide vests on. There was altercation with police. I believe one of them was actually killed when this suicide vest went off. And it's rather... The biggest thing that is scariest now about this is how little people have seemed to have learnt their lesson. You had Charlie Hebdo, right, at the Bataclan Theatre, and all the more it seems that we are just going to repeat the same mistakes over and over again, repeat the same ideological dogmas, despite not believe the evidence of our eyes and ears, right? Not believe the patterns we see emerging all across Europe. Obviously, France, Germany, Belgium and Austria, right? Poland is sort of like the one standout, as well as Hungary, right? That's why the EU and that's why all of the other bureaucrats are trying to sanction them and fine them to deliberately make their societies more unsafe. It's quite funny how you see a lot of people who are deemed, or people who are given the sort of like the label of civic nationalists, right? Which is basically nationalism without the outright racial component and stuff like that, right? Which inevitably, when you come to any kind of looking at politics in kind of like a nationalist view or wherever, you will inevitably run up against the ethnicity question, right? And race is just a part of that. And there's no hatred involved in that. Race is just a part of that. Race is a part of people from where they are from, right? And that ties back to their ethnicity, that ties back to their heritage, that ties back to their ancestry, and that will point you to a place that they are native and indigenous to. And we're seeing that there's a propaganda drive to convince native Britons, right, Welsh, the English, the Scots, the Irish, that they actually don't exist and their society has always been multiracial and multicultural and all this stuff, when that is outright not true. And as we discussed in the last episode, you're looking at England, or looking at the United Kingdom as a whole, you only need to go back to the 50s to see that that is not true. Right? You only need to go back to 1950 to have that myth dispelled. Never mind 1050, right? Never mind 50 AD. You only need to go back about, again, 80, 70 years to have that myth dispelled. But to try and push these narratives, our government has consistently covered up crimes that have been committed for racial and religious reasons and so on. And it does seem that that was done, at least in some capacity, with regard to the Bataclan incident. There have been reports resurfacing recently relating back to articles that were published at the time, right? So about a year, about 8 or so months later. For example, this one in the Daily Mail, the allegations that the French government suppressed gruesome torture of Bataclan victims, as official inquiry was told that some were viewer discretion and listener discretion advised to you, ladies and gentlemen. If you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, you're probably going to be hearing a lot of muted segment in this next bit. So maybe you want to go listen on Rumble or Spotify or Amazon Music if you want to get the full uncensored version. Official inquiry is told some were and had their eyes out by the ISIS killers. Victims of the terror attacks were tortured by ISIS, inquiry hears. Policemen on the scene of the nightclub vomited when they saw the victims. Prosecutors cast doubt on claims saying that no knives were found. 89 people died at the Bataclan in total on the attack last November. So they've alleged that there's been severe, and we're talking very severe atrocities, ladies and gentlemen, that were deliberately covered up for whatever reason, usually to push political propaganda and stuff like that, in the aftermath, particularly what happened on the second floor. Particularly what happened on the second floor of the Bataclan Theatre. What people have been saying on X, I'm not sure how much of these have been corroborated, But there's this post from BMAC, for example, been quite vocal on the Islamic takeover of certain parts of America in particular. I'm going to show you this post on screen now, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a couple more articles to read through to give you an insight into what's being said about this incident now. So on the second floor, particularly, apparently there's been more slaughtered than was actually reported, and potentially even 683 maimed in the name of Allah. You had victims' testicles shoved while still alive. You had eyes out with fingers and gun barrels, sockets left empty and bleeding. Pregnant women stabbed, one baby out on the floor. Heads partially, necks with shrapnel and broken bottles. Women were apparently post-mortem. Their bodies were defiled in pools of blood. And then on the second floor, police found bodies stacked like firewood, hanging from chandeliers, limbs twisted in death poses, not from bullets, from knives and hands. And these were not quick kills, but a chaotic slaughterhouse where bodies were stacked like firewood. There's one survivor, which is apparently a sealed testimony. They laughed while cutting. They said, "This is for Syria." One filmed it on a GoPro because ISIS wanted trophies, and there's been allegations now that footage like this has been used in ISIS propaganda and recruitment videos. There were 0 knives recovered, but slash wounds on 41 bodies. A DNA of 3 attackers was found inside victims' wounds, where they used bare hands. And there's now allegations that France buried this to protect cohesion, to protect the narrative that diversity and multiculturalism is our strength, and all of these things, which you'd be hard pressed to say that last part hasn't been the case, even if some of these claims have either been over embellished or they're outright false, right? What we saw on October the 7th gives us an indicator of the kind of stuff that these people will do, right? The kind of animalistic bloodlust, right, that these people often find themselves getting caught up in. We've seen, scaled back atrocities of this with the gangs. Obviously, people haven't lost their lives and they haven't had their bodies defiled and stuff like that, but we have instances of things happening in the UK, the easiest one to point to being the case of Charlene Downs, who there's been several media articles reporting on her that she was ground up and made into kebab meat. She was murdered, ground up, and made into kebab meat by her disgusting foreign gang. So the question is now, and this is why, when you see how politicized the media has become, when you see how much foreign governments waging war on ours, but our own governments have turned on us as well for whatever reason, because they hate us, and they're now doing seemingly what they can to protect the worst of jihadi terrorists, to protect the narrative. What do we believe? What do we believe? Says a lot when we get onto in a moment, when the lead singer, I believe it was, of Eagles of Death Metal, what's his name, Jesse Hughes, he apologized for what he said and then later went on to retract that apology, insinuating that the security that night could have been in on it, right? Insinuating that the security that night could have been in on it, and he was condemned by the French authorities, as far as I know, and he issued an apology, which he later retracted, right? An extract from that article, by the way, from the Rolling Stone, when he was giving an interview with the Fox Business Network last November, so that would have been straight away seemingly after the incident, because this article was published in Rolling Stone March 10th, 2016, so last November would have been the November the attacks took place. Hughes said he felt that something was amiss. Said he felt that something was amiss when he first arrived at the venue and noted the security guard for the backstage area didn't look at him. He's quoted to have said, "I immediately went to the promoter and said, 'Who is that guy? I want to put another dude on.' And the promoter goes, 'Well, some of the other guards aren't here yet.' And eventually he found that 6 or so wouldn't show up at all." Now, there's also allegations that the doors were propped open, right? Insinuating that people knew about it. They left the doors open so these terrorists could come in, indicating that they would have had prior knowledge of it. When asked why the guards didn't arrive, Hughes didn't make an official statement out of respect for the police investigating, but he continued, "It seems rather obvious that they had a reason not to show up." Obviously, 89 people were killed, right? Obviously, there's allegations that potentially even more were killed on the second floor, and the authorities covered it up. And then, this is what he then said, which I think most people at this point would be much in agreement with. He slammed the country's strict control laws on one thing in particular and highlighted what most people can say is just an incontrovertible fact. It's the biggest thing when it comes down to the gun control debate, ladies and gentlemen, is that things like this will always be resolved by guns one way or another. So in this incident with the Bataclan and many other things, right, it's either going to be resolved with a police officer, usually a male, turning up with a gun and ending the assailant's life if it can't be ended, if the confrontation can't be ended in a non-violent way. Or what has also happened in the past is an assailant or terrorist or whoever it is will turn the gun on himself or herself, right? Either way, it's ended with guns. And that's what he was basically pointing out. He said, "Did your French gun control stop a single person from dying at the Bataclan? If anyone can answer yes, I'd like to hear it, because I don't think so. I think the only thing that it stopped was some of the bravest men I've ever seen in my life charging." The only thing that stopped it, let me rephrase because I got that wrong. "I think the only thing that stopped it, i.e. the Bataclan attack, was some of the bravest men I've ever seen in my life charging head first into the face of death with their firearms." And that's exactly what we should be talking about in many instances where we're seeing now. James McMurdoch, when he had an Amazon delivery driver invade his home. It's on him to charge what could be into the face of death. And that's where we need to start taking this now, ladies and gentlemen, because of the instances we've seen. And we've seen how many instances the media will cover it up and try to obfuscate in all of these things. What you've done, as he pointed out, is with these strict gun control laws and all of these things, you've just hamstrung good people from defending themselves. That's all you've done. And you've emboldened criminals who will do the worst things, because they know the odds are the person's not going to have a gun on them to defend themselves and end your life, right? Because the government is taking care of that. And then when these things do inevitably come, like what happened with Lainie Williams, for example, what happened? It was armed police that turned up at the house. Funny that. Guns are quite clearly effective, right? Because when it's in the police capacity and they're turning up to deal with what they suspect is a violent murderer, they'll turn up and they'll have guns trained on the person, and they won't hesitate, if they feel they need to end the person's life. But by that point, it's too late. By that point, it is too late. And a great cruelty to the innocent has been done by depriving them of that means to defend themselves in that moment. He's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. So there's other things as well. There's another article here from the International Business Times. French government suppressed reports of Bataclan's victims' castration torture. So again, some of the torture was said to include eyes being gouged out, disembowelment, men who were castrated and had their testicles shoved in their mouths, and women who were stabbed in the genitals. The committee heard the torture was filmed for Islamic State propaganda. The details were given 14 hours of the details revealed during 14 hours of testimony given about the Paris attacks on the 21st of March. They were only released to the public on 5th of July. The witnesses said the acts took place on the second floor of the theatre after 3 terrorists took concert goers who were watching the band Eagles of Death Metal hostage. The investigator told the inquiry, "After the assault, we were with colleagues at the Passage Saint-Pierre-Amelot when I saw weeping from one of our colleagues who came outside to vomit. He told us what he had seen." So the reason, again, a lot of people are speculating about this now is, again, you're having multiple corroborated reports of this happening, ladies and gentlemen. Despite what the Paris and the French authorities have gone on to say, in fact, that now the Muslim population has got to about 1/5, I believe, of the country. France is in serious danger of falling again to another type of foreign imperialistic fascist power. That's what we're seeing now. So it's going to be very, very similar. It's going to be very, very similar to what we would have seen in World War II, for example, when they were taken over. It was just by a German power in that instance. Now they're getting taken over by whatever brand of Islam is going to take them over. And he told us what we had seen. The investigator said that some of the bodies had also been beheaded. These claims were refuted by prosecutors who said no sharp knives were found at the scene. Who's to say it could have been on the assailants? Who's to say they couldn't have been blown to pieces when one of them went up in their suicide vest, right? But also, as Amy pointed out, if this is to be correct, there was shrapnel and broken bottles that were used. If that is correct. So maybe they didn't have sharp knives. Doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen. And that the mutilations were caused by the detonation of explosive devices containing nails, bolts, shrapnel, and rapid gunfire. Either way, more than enough to say, all right, we don't want anything to do with these people anymore, right? We don't have anything to gain via further interaction with these people. We want them gone. But the French authorities will seemingly never say that. Apparently, the president of the committee, Georges Fenech, heard that a father had been told whilst visiting his son's body at the morgue that the right side of his face, i.e. the face of his son's body, was unrecognizable because terrorists had his eye and down the right-hand side of his face. The report states, quote, "On the causes of the death of my son at the Forensic Institute in Paris, I was told, and what a shock it was for me in that moment, they had cut off his, put them in his mouth, and he was... When I saw him behind glass, lying on a table, a white shroud covering him up to the neck, a psychologist was with me. He said, this is the only presentable part, your son's left profile. I found that he had no right eye. I was informed that they had his eye and down the right side of his face, where there was a very large hematoma that we could all see. And asked how the man's body parts ended up in his mouth, the prosecutor replied, I do not have that information. So there's a lot of speculation at the moment as to what happened, but even the things that we do know, even the things that we can know, seemingly with certainty, should be more than enough reason, say, the people that support this and the people that support the ideology that spawned this, right, many of whom are distinctly not French and have been let in by a disgusting, treasonous oversight committee, if you will, that's called the EU, and has exposed all of the countries within it to this ever-growing carnivorous cancer. The thing is, as I said in that previous episode, ladies and gentlemen, the thing that people forget seemingly about that first letter of coexist is that letter wants to eat all the others. Right? And yeah, we can have conversations about other religions and stuff like that, and religion as a whole, yes. But I think you're seeing, for all the talk of Islam is a religion of peace and yada, 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 and all of this stuff, you're seeing the experiment being run in real time. You are seeing the results of the experiment every single day. And as the popular saying goes, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Maybe we should be taking a different tack. Maybe the propaganda, or maybe the slogans that we've been using, multiculturalism, diversity is our strength, coexist, all of that stuff, maybe it's not working. Maybe it's not working. And we need to push for different solutions. Namely, at this point now, Britain, all of Europe, it would seem, and many instances or many places in America as well, and Canada especially, Japan, need to push, and this is good news because Japan, despite the fact we just went over what the communist leader said, Japan has now seemingly one of the most right-wing leaders in recent memory, especially with regards to immigration, to push for remigration. Because this is an imported problem. And that's just the reality. It's an unfortunate reality, but it just is what is. It's not going to get any better if we keep doing the same thing. It's not going to get any better if we keep voting in the same way. So we need to change. We need to change. Fundamentally, nothing else changes until our attitude, our outlook changes at a fundamental level. That is when things are going to change. If you enjoyed that clip, then make sure to go on over to the Voice of the Valleys X page at VOT_Valleys on X. We're also on Instagram at Voice of the Valleys. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Godspeed.